McDonough, was holding Erik. I'd felt the skepticism in our first strategy meeting. Few of the soldiers had understood why Crane was willing to risk so many lives to save just one. Even after he'd explained that, in addition to Erik, we'd be rescuing the soldiers Toxic had taken hostage during the Coalition's attack on Rittenhouse Research Facility to save Penny, only a handful thought the pros of the strike outweighed the cons. It was hearing Penny's story that had erased their doubts and replaced them with fierce determination. The torture she'd suffered at Mac's hands, and the reasons behind that torture, were strong motivators. There was an open seat across from Janelle, Jared, and the curly-haired boy, whose name began with an M, I think. As much as I liked Janelle, I had no desire to spend the cross-country flight absorbing the spitefulness leaking off of Jared. My nerves were already frayed from the never-ending parade of horrific images of Mac beating Erik unconscious that I saw every time I closed my eyes. Any additional ugly thoughts were likely to sever them completely, so I continued up the aisle towards an empty space at the end of one row, closest to the cockpit. A moment later, I regretted my decision when Frederick Kraft squeezed in beside me. "Not too much longer now," he said as he lowered the harness over his head. I ignored his attempt at idle conversation and stared straight ahead. Frederick had arrived at the cottage a day after I had. To my complete shock, his appearance had been met with warm smiles and claps on the back. He was on a first-name basis with many of the soldiers, as well as Crane. From the time we'd met in D.C., when Henry, the captain and third member of mine and Erik's hunter team, first introduced us, I'd liked Frederick. He was kind and gentle, and had a way of putting those around him at ease. Over the past 2 years, I'd come to think of Frederick as more than just Henry's boyfriend, but as my friend, too. Then he'd risked his life to help me and Alex, Donovan's son, escape from Toxic. He'd used his position as a conductor on the underground to get us safely out of the capital and halfway across the country. Realizing that Frederick wasn't a schoolteacher like he'd told me had stung. The lie was a betrayal of my trust and our friendship. But had that been the extent of his deception, I would have gotten over it already. It was the fact that Frederick had known that Crane was as eager to talk to me as I was him, yet never told me, that caused my anger to spike whenever I thought about it. Frederick had even tried to dissuade me from crossing the border and seeking out Crane. He had agreed to take me into Coalition territory, but made it clear he wasn't thrilled about doing so. His reluctance was part of why, in the end, I'd gone ahead without him. The other part was because I'd been scared for him, worried that traveling with me would paint a target on his back. My reaction to Frederick's arrival was not one of my finer moments. Even now, while my anger was still festering, I was slightly ashamed of the way I'd blown up and all but attacked him. If Penny hadn't been there to calm me down, the situation would have escalated out of control. I was furious that Frederick could have saved me the trouble of sifting through my own diluted memories to find the cottage, that we could have reached Crane days earlier had Frederick just told me the truth, and most of all, that Erik's suffering had been prolonged because of his failure to do so. When Frederick tried to explain he'd withheld the location of the cottage because I hadn't told him why I wanted to see Crane, my temper flared. It had felt like he was blaming me for his omission, like our mutual communication failure had been solely mine. I'd resolved to put my personal feelings aside for the time being. As a viewer, Frederick had a vital role in this rescue. His talent was extremely strong, and Toxic had trained him to use it to track people. Already he'd been viewing Erik at the prison, which was how we knew for certain that Erik was still alive. Crane's spies had provided us with holographic blueprints of Tramblewood with Erik's exact location plainly marked. I'd committed them to memory. Still, this wasn't my first mission. I'd been on enough of them to know that once we were on the ground and the fighting began, I'd be lucky if I could find my way out of a paper bag, let alone through the maze of identical hallways and staircases. I needed Frederick. More importantly, Erik needed Frederick.
"It's not too late to change your mind and stay here," Frederick said softly, mistaking my silence for concern over the rescue mission.
"Not a chance," I said coolly. This wasn't the first time someone had suggested I stay behind. My answer never changed. Crane and the pilot, a middle-aged woman with a long blonde braid named Donna, were the last to board.